In early October, we went to 90% odds of approval by the January 10th deadline, which is ARK and 21 shares filed for the spot Bitcoin ETF. There, basically, the SEC has all these periods where they can, or deadlines where they can delay, deny, or approve almost always. And in history for the last decade plus, they've delayed every time they got the chance. They're coming up to a point where they can no longer delay. They have to either approve or deny, and that's why we think it's going to happen. So yeah, we've been pretty confident in that take. We've seen more and more things that aren't necessarily changing our odds, but just confirming our prior convictions and our prior views, and just steps in the process that would need to happen no matter what in order to see these things approved in early January. So right now that window is probably January 8th to January 10th where we could see it happen. So it's a 3-day window where we could see these approvals, and it would be an en masse approval. It would probably be for everyone and basically says, okay, if you're ready to go, you can go. We're going to approve you here. Whether or not all of them will be ready to go, have all the plumbing and pipes tied up on the back end, that's a different discussion, but we do think it's going to happen.
James Seyffart is a Bloomberg ETF analyst. He's one of 2 analysts that have been covering and breaking down all the Bitcoin ETF developments. In his latest interview, he highlighted a 3-day window in which he believes the ETFs will be approved. First off, Seyffart reconfirmed his 90% odds of approval by January 10th. As to what dates he's looking for approval, January 8th, January 9th, and January 10th, a 3-day window in which he believes all 12 spot Bitcoin ETFs will be approved. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video where Seyffart also comments on the odds and dates of approval of a spot Ethereum ETF. Also guys, only a small percentage of my viewers are actually subscribed. If you enjoy finance content, consider subscribing or liking the video. It's free and you can always change your mind. Now here's James Seyffart with his latest breakdown on the Bitcoin ETFs.
Technically, they all have different timelines. The only one that has a final deadline is ARK and 21 shares. Their application they filed in April. They were long before anyone. BlackRock was the next one to file in June when everything started heating up about the possible approvals. But ARK and 21 shares were already basically through the first few steps of this process. That said, our view and what they did with the Ethereum futures ETFs, we've been saying for a long time now they're going to do, is they're going to line everyone up because they don't want to be basically kingmakers. They don't want to be picking favorites here to win these races, whether it's getting the most assets or acquiring the most liquidity. So if the SEC is going to approve all these things, they're likely going to approve them all at once because, again, they don't want to play kingmaker in this case. Now, there's you can argue that sets a weird precedent, and we're usually if you file first and the SEC approves, you get to go out first. I think this is a unique situation. I mean, they've been denying these things for a decade. It's not like this was completely new and out of the blue, but it's very interesting to see what will happen. And obviously we think it will be approved, but we do have that 10% odds out there. And I can go into a little more nuance about why we've gotten more and more confident. We've heard rumblings from different people, from people involved in this process, people who know other people involved in this process. You kind of have to we have sources that are very reliable and some sources that we don't know how reliable they can be. But when you're hearing the similar things from a bunch of different people, coming from different angles, which you've been hearing for over a year. And then we also saw the ETH futures ETF, which they all got approval. There was a lot of talk about the SEC's trying to line them all up. And there was a lot of moves by different players. Valkyrie specifically, some other issuers were trying to jump the line and get out first, which really smart, savvy plays from my point of view. But the SEC just basically did everything they possibly could to make sure everyone was going out on the same day and didn't let anyone do it. So the fact that they were willing to go to those lengths to make sure that not one person got a head start on everyone else shows to us that that's likely what they're going to do here with spot if they indeed are going to approve you're at. So obviously when BlackRock filed, that was a key indication that they're the largest asset in the world. They are not going to be doing this if they think there's I said this last time I was on, right? Even if they thought it might not have been quite 50% or something like that, they have to think there's some significant odds of getting this through, right? The other side of this is the Grayscale lawsuit. That really tripped things up. And that was one of the reasons why we were more bullish than everyone beforehand, because we were calling for Grayscale to win that lawsuit when most other people were saying they weren't going to win, particularly those outside of the industry. And then those surveillance sharing agreements you were talking about, ironically enough, there were some examples of surveillance sharing agreements in prior applications. The Winklevoss twins actually included one in one of their very first applications because they own Gemini, the exchange, and they were basically saying we're going to use Gemini pricing and we're going to have a surveillance sharing agreement with Gemini's trading platform. But the main crux of that problem is you can't just control the ETF, the custodian, the trading platform, and then say you're being surveilled. So that was a whole different issue on why they that wouldn't get through today, essentially. But Coinbase, obviously things have become just more institutionalized. But when BlackRock filed, one of the big things was they included that surveillance sharing agreement with Coinbase. But honestly, in my view, the Grayscale decision in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals basically vacated the need even for a Coinbase surveillance sharing agreement. It basically says that the surveillance sharing agreement with with the CME Bitcoin futures markets, which is regulated by the CFTC and has a surveillance sharing agreement, is enough and should be enough for a spot ETF, is basically the crux of the issue that came along with the Grayscale decision. So we have all those things that made us more and more confident. And then at the end of September, we saw a lot of delays. Like I talked about all those dates, and people were like, oh, that's it, they're going really early. But we were really like at the cusp of like going into a federal government shutdown, and then people were trying to get things out the door. But after that, shortly after that, I think it was October 8th or 9th, we started hearing rumors that there was comments coming back on what's called the S1s, or the prospectuses. So all these dates and things I'm usually talking about are via this 19B4 process, which is like the exchanges and these issuers file for a rule change to like list something on their exchange. In this case, a spot Bitcoin ETF. And the SEC has to say, okay, we're going to allow this rule change so you can do this. There's two things that need to happen for an ETF to be approved. In history, in the last decade plus, they never did anything besides delay, and then deny in that 19B4 process. There was nothing else that ever happened. Nothing really ever happened with that S1 side of things. So that 19B4 process is with one division of the SEC called the Division of Trading Markets. The prospectus has to get sign off from another division called the Division of Corporate Finance. No spot Bitcoin filing has ever had any comments from the Division of Corporate Finance as far as we have been aware historically. So when we saw that, that was a huge pattern break for us, combined with the fact that the GBTC case and Grayscale case was confirmed by the DC Circuit. It was just all these things. That's when we went to 90%. We were like, the SEC is not going to be coordinating and going over like the fine-tuned aspects of the risks of the trusts and the funds that are these ETFs, how the structure is actually going to work. They wouldn't have gone to that level of detail if they weren't getting ready to really approve. And they went early in October. Like I said, they have till January 10th. So they've been ironing things out with these issuers since at least the first half of October. So this is a process that's been ongoing for a long time. And then if we want to, we get into the weeds of like these comment periods, but there was something that happened at the end of November that really gave me a lot of confidence, confirmed the narrowing window of when these approvals might happen.
So there's James on why he's confident in his 90% odds of approval for the Bitcoin ETFs and why he believes they will come between January 8th and January 10th next year, less than a month ago. Now, looking further into 2024, there are also multiple spot Ethereum ETF applications. Although he doesn't yet have official odds of approval, he does have it at higher than 50%. But the odds are not at the 90% level either. His thoughts on how likely a spot Ethereum ETF is to be approved, as well as what dates investors should be looking at.
So I think it's more likely than not. We haven't come out with an official odd. We're actually in the process of debating where we are on that. That said, like, it's a completely different animal, right? It's like you can see ways that Gensler could argue that it's not the same situation. You could say that they're not ready. You can argue that it's not as, the futures market isn't as robust or institutionalized. I don't agree with those things, but you could see where the SEC could maybe like draw delineations, go to proof of stake versus proof of work, make arguments that that's, so basically if the SEC really wants to stop this, they probably would have to either find a way to just like kind of kick the can down the road a little bit, which I don't know how they'll do that, or they'd have to basically claim ETH as a security, which I've written notes and I got lambasted for on Twitter, basically saying the SEC, in my view, has basically implicitly accepted Ethereum as a commodity, which is why I think we will see these things ultimately approved, more likely than not, by the end of May. That's like we have ARK and 21 shares for their Bitcoin ETF. Their first deadline is January 10th. We have ARK and 21 shares alongside Van Eck, whose deadlines for the ETH ETFs, their final deadline is going to be May 23rd, May 24th. So I think we could see approvals then. There's no guarantee there, but I do think obviously that it doesn't imply automatically that we get an approval. I do think it's 100% a positive sign if we get these B2C ETFs approved, that it's a very positive indication that we will likely see the ETH spots ET approved, but it's not as, we're not at that 90% level, that's for sure.
So January 8th, January 9th, and January 10th for a spot Bitcoin ETF, and May 23rd and May 24th for an Ethereum ETF. Mark these dates down in your calendar as they are undoubtedly going to be explosive. A point in time that will go down in history as a major milestone for the top two cryptocurrencies, the dates in which the floodgates open to institutional capital. Anyway guys, hope you all enjoyed today's video and that provided you with some value. I'll see you all in the next one, and as always, all the best.